You're listening to the Philosopher's Note on Letters from a Stoic. More wisdom in less time.
Hi, this is Brian. Welcome to the Philosopher's Notes on Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. We'll start with a quote. "A good character is the only guarantee of everlasting, carefree happiness." That's Seneca from Letters from a Stoic. So Stoicism is one of my favorite philosophies. What we know of this classic Hellenistic philosophy is based on the texts created by its three primary sages, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. In this note, we're going to take a quick look at Seneca, a statesman, Stoic philosopher, contemporary of Jesus, and tutor to the Roman Emperor Nero, who must not have liked Seneca's Stoic principles too much because he eventually had him killed. Either that, or there may have been some political issues going on, huh? Alright, so Seneca's Letters from a Stoic is packed full of big ideas I think you'll enjoy. First, let's take a quick look at his life and philosophy, then we'll jump in. So, we'll start with his life. Now, the reliability of the details of Seneca's early life are shaky at best, but he was believed to be born in Cordoba, then the most prominent city in Spain, or Hispania in the Roman Empire, at about the same time as Jesus, between 4 and 1 BCE. So Seneca was a statesman and a philosopher, and is widely known for his skilled essays, and in fact is recognized by many as the founder of the essay. In 49 CE, Seneca became the tutor to the 12-year-old boy who would become the Emperor Nero. For 8 years, he acted as Nero's unofficial chief minister, before Nero compelled him to commit suicide after the discovery of a plot that may have elevated Seneca to the throne as emperor. So how about a quick introduction to Stoicism as well? The modern word Stoic is derived from the calm demeanor of the Stoic philosopher. The philosophy itself, however, was named Stoicism because its founder, Zeno, who lived from 344 to 262 BCE, taught in a well-known stoa, a colonnade or porch. Now, Stoicism is one of the three prominent philosophies of the Hellenistic era. The other two are Cynicism and Epicureanism. The philosophy Stoicism was founded by Zeno about 300 BCE, and to put that in perspective, Plato founded the Academy in 385 BCE. And although relatively obscure today, Stoicism was the dominant philosophy of the Western world for several centuries. It lost its prominence when the Emperor Constantine declared Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century. So that's a quick overview of Seneca's life and his philosophy, Stoicism. Now we'll jump into the big ideas. We'll start with, do you like yourself? Quote, "What difference does it make, after all, what your position in life is if you dislike it yourself?" It's hilarious and so true, huh? Isn't it amazing how we can spend so much of our time doing everything we can to please everyone around us, and at the end of the day, not even like ourselves or our position in life that much at all? Eek. So rule number 1, like yourself and like what you do. And a really powerful mantra related to liking yourself is from Luis, the founder of Hay House, Hayes, "You can heal your life." You can see the notes on that. And I say this mantra to myself many times a day when I look in the mirror. Basically, every time I pass the mirror, I say this at least once or twice. It goes like this. I love and accept myself completely. I love and accept myself completely. I love and accept myself completely. Now that might sound a little wacky the first few times you say it. It did for me. But if you believe Luis, and I definitely do, your opinion of yourself was most powerfully shaped when you were a child, looking into the eyes of a parent or teacher. So to reprogram yourself most positively, it's important to look yourself in the eye as you say your mantras, ideally out loud. Give it a try. You will feel great. I promise. The next big idea is creating a disposition to good. Quote, "You have to persevere and fortify your pertinacity until the will to good becomes a disposition to good. End quote. First, let's define pertinacity. It means holding firmly to an opinion or a course of action, as in, he worked with a pertinacious resistance to interruptions. It's kind of synonymous for stubbornness. So we need to work with a stubbornness and strong discipline until our willpower to do the right thing leads to a disposition of doing the right thing. Does that make sense? I love that. Seneca also says, how much better to pursue a straight course and eventually reach that destination where the things that are pleasant and the things that are honorable finally become for you the same. End quote. That's an amazing thought. You may want to rewind that and listen to it again. I've read that many times. I love it. And this is a good time to remember Aristotle's wisdom that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. The next big idea is focus. Quote, to be everywhere is to be nowhere. End quote. So I love the fact that that was said by a guy who lived 2,000 years ago. Apparently, multitasking and overworking have been around for a while. There are obviously a lot of ways we can look at this, from the frenzied pace we tend to live, running from one activity to another, to the constant juggling of projects in a never-ending loop of trying to do way more than possible and or necessary. So I'll ask, are you being everywhere and therefore nowhere? How can you slow down and experience the power of now? Another thought comes to mind from Ken Wilber, the modern integral philosopher. You can see my notes on his work. He talks about the fact that we have what he calls multiple lines of development in our lives, from the spiritual line of development to the intellectual, creative, physical, social, family, moral, etc. Obviously, we want to push all of our lines forward, but Wilber likes to say, don't be a metaphysical glutton. Don't try to develop all of your lines at once. Slow down, pick a line or two, or maybe 3 to work on, and focus. In other words, to be everywhere is to be nowhere. Next big idea is, hello, God. Quote, God is near you, is with you, is inside you. End quote. So how about we quit looking outside ourselves for God? I'm pointing to you right now and saying, God's in there, inside you. Next big idea is your ideal state. Quote, man's ideal state is realized when he has fulfilled the purpose for which he is born. And what is it that reason demands of him? Something very easy, that he live in accordance with his own nature. So Marcus Aurelius, another Stoic philosopher, and the Roman emperor about 100 years after Nero, said something very similar in his classic Meditations. You can see the notes on that. He says, quote, everything, a horse, a vine, is created for some duty. For what task, then, were you yourself created? A man's true delight is to do the things he was made for. Abraham Maslow, you can see his notes, says, musicians must make music, artists must paint, poets must write if they are to be ultimately at peace with themselves. What human beings can be, they must be. They must be true to their own nature. This need we may call self-actualization. It refers to man's desire for self-fulfillment, namely, to the tendency for him to become actually in what he is potentially, to become everything one is capable of becoming. And Martin Seligman, the leader of the positive psychology movement and author of Authentic Happiness, you can see my notes on that as well, tells us that we'll live a happy life when we discover and consistently use our signature strengths, which help us understand what our true nature is and how we can live in accordance with it. And if you haven't taken Seligman's strengths assessment test yet, I highly recommend you join the nearly 1 million people who have at AuthenticHappiness.com. So, for what were you made? For what purpose were you born? Do you know? If so, are you living it? If not, is your primary purpose to figure out your purpose? Please say yes. So we all have a purpose, a dharma. Call it what you want, but we're here to fulfill it. So let's get on that. It leads us to the next big idea, the troubled ones. Quote, the worse a person is, the less he feels it. That's classic and so true. You may have noticed. Just remember, the worse a person is, the less he feels it the next time you're dealing with someone who's struggling and maybe being a little challenging. All right, the next one is the philosopher's power. Quote, philosophy's power to blunt all the blows of circumstances is beyond belief. And the philosopher, he alone knows how to live for himself. He is the one, in fact, who knows the fundamental thing, how to live. Now, philosophy and philosophers have such a bad rap these days. Somehow it got away from its Greek roots and has become, for the most part, a topic reserved for boring, crusty old, and usually dead, white guys. The classic Greeks and the Romans would have been disappointed. Did you know the word philosopher literally means lover of wisdom? Where wisdom means knowledge of life? Therefore, a philosopher is someone who is in love with learning how to live. Not a professor at a university droning on about pedantic stuff that has no recognizable practical application. Now, I confess parenthetically here that I must be still getting over my B in my classic Western philosophy class at UCLA, but isn't it remarkable how boring they can make philosophy, and even more frightening how far from practical? For the record, I studied psychology with a minor in business at UCLA. The philosophy classes were just so ridiculously not cool that I only took one. But alas, back to Seneca. You ask, what is the purpose of philosophy? He answers, quote, shall I tell you what philosophy holds out to humanity? Counsel. You are here to help the unhappy. And how much of your time should you invest in studying philosophy? Seneca advises, quote, when some state or other offered Alexander a part of its territory and half of all its property, he told them that he hadn't come to Asia with the intention of accepting whatever they cared to give him, but of letting them keep whatever he chose to leave them. Philosophy, likewise, tells all other occupations, it's not my intention to accept whatever time is left over from you. You shall have instead what I reject. Give your whole mind to her. So let's give all of our minds and hearts to the pursuit of wisdom, and remember philosophy's power to blunt the blows of circumstance. The next big idea is a path to salvation. Quote, a consciousness of wrongdoing is the first step to salvation. You have to catch yourself doing it before you can correct it. End quote. Now, this is an obvious but often overlooked truth. To change a behavior, first we need to catch ourselves doing it. And I've been practicing removing certain things from my consciousness, thoughts, words, behaviors, while on sabbatical here in Bali. Stuff like criticism of others and myself, gossip, complaining, comparing, impatience, holding my breath, getting frustrated, and other stuff that just isn't in line with my highest self. Now, I've pretty much always known that these things needed to go, but it wasn't until I made it a practice to systematically remove them that I started to really have the consciousness of wrongdoing. Once I started writing down what I call my no's every morning in my journaling, I started seeing all the times I'd started criticizing or gossiping or getting impatient or whatever. So it's the ability to catch ourselves doing it that gives us the power to correct it. Again, really obvious stuff. But what about you? What wrongdoing do you need to catch yourself doing so you can correct it? And what are you waiting for? Get on that. All right, the next big idea is on death. Quote, you want to live, but do you know how to live? You are scared of dying, and tell me, is the kind of life you lead really any different from being dead? End quote. That's pretty powerful, and that puts it in perspective, huh? Seneca dedicates quite a bit of energy to discussing death and the importance of honoring the fact that we're all going to die. Sorry to break that news to you. So we might as well get clear on it, and in his words, rehearse it so we can fully live. He says, rehearse death. To say this is to tell a person to rehearse his freedom. A person who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. He is above, or at any rate beyond the reach of, all political power. The next big idea deals with death as well. It's called the play of life. Quote, "As it is with a play, so it is with life. What matters is not how long the acting lasts, but how good it is." End quote. Ah, how great is that? Now, do you go to a play for how long it is going to last or how good it is? It's the same thing with our lives. Let's quit worrying about just how long it's going to be and focus on how well we play our part. Yeah? And remember, Seneca says, quote, "Every day, therefore, should be regulated as if it were the one that brings up the rear, the one that rounds out and completes our lives." The next big idea is called pleasures and punishments. Quote, "So-called pleasures, when they go beyond a certain limit, are but punishments." So, deeply influenced by the classic Greek philosophers like Aristotle, the Stoics were and are all about self-control, self-mastery, and virtuous living. And this reminds me of Aristotle's virtuous mean from his Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle says, quote, "For both excessive and insufficient exercise destroy one's strength, and both eating and drinking too much or too little destroy health, whereas the right quantity produces, increases, or preserves it. So it is the same with temperance, courage, and the other virtues. This much then is clear. In all our conduct, it is the mean that is to be commended." So Aristotle establishes the fact that virtue lies between the vice of excess and the vice of deficiency. And Seneca reminds us here that so-called pleasures, when they go past a certain point, become punishments. Really powerful stuff. So let's put the spotlight back on you. What pleasures in your life are you taking so far that they've become punishments? It could be drinking a bit too much, watching a bit too much TV. That would be just past any TV, by the way. Just kidding, mostly. It could be eating too much, spending too much time online, whatever. What is it for you? And how can you get back to the virtuous mean? Make sure your pleasures don't turn into punishments. And remember this quote from Seneca the next time you go out to the bars. He says, quote, "Drunkenness is nothing but a self-induced state of insanity." End quote. The next big idea is harshness properly employed. Seneca says, quote, "Be harsh with yourself at times." End quote. So again, the Stoics were pretty badass peeps. They weren't messing around with living virtuously. And in this case, we've got Seneca reminding us that at times we need to be harsh with ourselves. This does not mean, of course, that we need to go around like that albino monk from the Da Vinci Code, mutilating ourselves. Kind of gross. But it does mean that, at times, we need to give ourselves a Zen stick to the head and wake up from the bad habits that are dragging us down. As with the virtuous mean chat from before, there's a virtuous mean here. Too much harshness is destructive. We'll develop a sense of self-loathing that's a weakness. Aristotle would consider it a vice of excess, too much. Now, too little harshness, on the other hand, and we're a self-contented and usually kind of self-righteous ass. That would be a vice of deficiency. The virtuous mean rests right there in the middle path, where we're appropriately correcting our weaknesses without self-criticism per se, just a nice firm look in the eye and a smile as we embody more and more of our ideals while burning out, as Rumi would say, the dross that clouds the silver. Rumi says this. He says, "This discipline and rough treatment are a furnace to extract the silver from the dross. This testing purifies the gold by boiling the scum away." Beautiful. Remember that the next time you're being a little harsh with yourself. All right. The next and final big idea is daria. Quote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult." End quote. Wow. I love that one. So what dream of yours have you created a big old story around? You know, the one that says your dream is too hard to bring to life, that it's impossible. Right. Remember, quote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult." So what is it for you? I dare you to do it. All right, that wraps up this big idea. I've already given you a little bio on Seneca, so I'll skip that. But I think you'll also like the Philosopher's Notes on Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, another Stoic philosopher, as well as Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and Epictetus's Enchiridion. How about we go over some of the quotes from the sidebar, then we'll call it a note. Seneca, these are all by Seneca, the quotes I'll share with you now. He says, "The place one's in, though, doesn't make any contribution to peace of mind. It's the spirit that makes everything agreeable to oneself." And he says, "Life is never incomplete if it is an honorable one. At whatever point you leave life, if you leave it in the right way, it is whole. Refuse to let the thought of death bother you. Nothing is grim when we have escaped that fear." We should live as if we were in public view, and think, too, as if someone could peer into the inmost recesses of our hearts, which someone can. There is about wisdom a nobility and magnificence in the fact that she doesn't just fall to a person's lot, that each man owes her to his own efforts, that one doesn't go to anyone other than oneself to find her. The wise man then followed a simple way of life, which is hardly surprising when you consider how even in this modern age he seeks to be as little encumbered as he possibly can. Philosophy takes as her aim the state of happiness. She shows us what are real and what are only apparent evils. She strips men's minds of empty thinking, bestows a greatness that is solid, and administers a check to greatness where it is puffed up in all an empty show. She sees that we are left no doubt about the difference between what is great and what is bloated. There is nothing the wise man does reluctantly. A man is as unhappy as he has convinced himself he is. What's the good of dragging up sufferings which are over, of being unhappy now just because you were then? Everything hangs on one's thinking. Straightforwardness and simplicity are in keeping with goodness. He says, "See what daily exercise does for one." Away with the world's opinion of you. It's always unsettled and divided. For men in a state of freedom had thatch for their shelter, while slavery dwells beneath marble and gold. If you shape your life according to nature, you will never be poor. If according to people's opinions, you will never be rich. Well, there you go. There's a quick look at Seneca and Letters from a Stoic. Really hope you enjoyed. I like that one a lot. And lots of good stuff there. If you enjoyed it, I think you'll enjoy the rest of the book, as well as Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. There you go. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed, and looking forward to sharing more with you. Have a fantastic day. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed this Philosopher's Note. Please go to www.philosophersnotes.com to download more.